So I did my mock presentation on the House versus NCAA lawsuit. So just some background information about the case. The lawsuit was brought by former Arizona State swimmer Grant House and TCU women's basketball player Sedona Price. It is also combined with two other lawsuits, Carter versus NCAA and Hubbard versus NCAA. And it seeks an injunction against the NCAA and Power 5 conferences. So just some more about Carter versus NCAA. Lawsuit was brought by former Duke football player Dwayne Carter, Stanford soccer player Nia Harrison, and former TCU women's basketball player Sedona Price against the NCAA and the Power 5 conferences. They argued the NCAA brought Byzantine draconian rules that will restrict athletes from receiving compensation. Hubbard versus NCAA, that was brought by former Oklahoma State running back and current Carolina Panthers running back Chuba Hubbard. So it alleges the NCAA and Power 5 conferences didn't pay Alston awards. The awards are educational related benefits, including musical instruments, computers, scholarships for graduate school or vocational school. It just seeks to acquire damages for current and former NCAA athletes from April 1st, 2019 to the date of class certification. And also about this House settlement seeks to lift restrictions of media rights revenue sharings and create a new structure of intercollegiate athletics, which we will get into right next. So number one, there will now be direct NIL payments to athletes. Schools are able to pay the athletes directly. Schools will have the power to create rules that can limit these boosters. Any endorsement deal between an athlete and third party can be vetted to ensure it's for a valid business purpose. So since 2021, athletes have been able to profit off of third-party vendors due to a Supreme Court decision in which the Supreme Court decision ruled 9-0 against the NCAA. And that allowed the college athletes to be paid. So since that, schools set up boosters and they created these NIL collectives to help pay these athletes. That's very similar to what WVU did with the Country Roads Trust. They created that Country Roads Trust, and NIL has been a big part now in intercollegiate athletics and trying to acquire talent. Next is the $20.5 million in revenue sharing. Schools are now able to share up to $20.5 million in revenue sharing. There's going to be a 4% increase of the revenue sharing each year for the next 10 years. But schools can opt out of the revenue sharing. For example, Maine, a couple of days ago, they opted out of the House settlement, so they will not be doing any revenue sharing. So each schools, they may share their revenues differently amongst all the athletes. For example, there was another idea that 75% of the revenue would go to football players, 15% will go to men's basketball players, 5% will go to women's basketball players, and another 5% to the rest of the sports. However, the plaintiffs, they believe that about 90% is going to go to football due to all of the media rights deals that football has. Football has been a big revenue stream for all of these colleges. So number three is the $2.8 billion settlement. So $2.8 billion will be paid out to athletes who played from 2016 to 2024. The NCAA will be responsible for about 40%, and that is about $1.12 billion. 60% will come from the 32 Division I conferences. So just some more breakdown about that 60%. So the Power 5 conferences, they will pay about 24%. The Group of Five conferences, which is the AAC, the Sun Belt, the Mountain West, Conference USA, and the MAC, they will pay 10%. The FCS will pay 14%. And non-Division I football conferences are responsible for 12%. The settlement is just so important for the NCAA because if it went to trial, the NCAA could be liable for up to like $20 billion in damages. So next is the new scholarship and roster size limits. So this is very interesting as well. In all this, they have new roster size limits for all of these sports. So, for example, last year football had an 85 scholarship limit, but now they have 105. So it's just a roster cap of 105 players for football. Because before, when they had the 85 scholarships, they could say have 30 walk-ons, 20 walk-ons. For another sport, this is my favorite sport, ice hockey. For example, last year I worked with NCAA ice hockey team at Robert Morris, and we had 18 scholarships on our team, but now we have 26. But before, we had 29 players on the roster. We just had like 9 walk-ons. But now we have a roster cap at 26, and the same goes with women's hockey as well. And another sport that's very interesting. So for football, they had 13 scholarships, and then now they have a roster cap of 15. So you could have 15 scholarship players or just 15 players in general on the team. Baseball is another interesting sport as well. For example, last year, WVU baseball, they can only have 11.7 scholarships, but now they have a roster limit of 34. So you could have 34 scholarship players, which is unlikely that the baseball would have 34 scholarships. So say you could have 20 and you could have 14 walk-ons. So these roster limits too was originally why Judge Wilkin requested that the roster limits be renegotiated. That was the threat of potentially bringing it to trial, was just the language and the roster limits. She was mostly concerned about the athletes being removed from the rosters, just because now there is a greater chance that some players could be cut. Because in other schools, I'm sure WVU has had to do this, but a lot of other schools have had to cut players from their team just to trim down their roster, since football before definitely had more than 105 players on the roster. So the final ruling. Judge Claudia Wilkin issued her final ruling approving the House settlement on June 6th, 2025. It finally removes all the amateurism rules that govern college athletics. So college athletics, because of this, is going through a major change, especially since now it is not viewed as amateurism anymore. So the schools are going to begin paying the athletes on July 1st, and the settlement goes into effect for the 2025-2026 school year. So this is very interesting. So because of all of this, they decided to create the College Sports Commission. So Brian Seeley, he was a former MLB executive and also a lawyer. He was hired to oversee this new College Sports Commission that was made through the commissioners of the conference. So he was hired by the commissioners of the ACC, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12. And then this new commission's job, they will oversee the enforcement of the new rules, revenue sharing, NIL, and the roster limits. But what's really interesting now is with this new organization, it takes a lot of the power away from the NCAA. The NCAA, before, they held a lot of power. They could punish schools. They could fine schools. Any schools that technically broke the rules. But now a lot of that power is being taken away from the NCAA and given to this new College Sports Commission, because this new College Sports Commission has the ability to punish schools who break the rules. So that could be fines and other restrictions placed on the schools. And then their new NIL Go website, that is going to be managed by the company Deloitte. So just some potential fallout. There could be many lawsuits now against the schools. If a player believes that they aren't making what they should be making due to the revenue sharing, they can now go and sue the schools. So more schools could potentially be dropping their athletic programs to Division II or Division III. For example, St. Francis, they had in Pennsylvania, they have just dropped their athletic programs to the Division III level. The NCAA has been trying to get antitrust exemption from Congress, which will protect the NCAA and its member institutions from lawsuits. Athletes may soon be considered employees of the school since these amateurism rules are gone, and they could be making a salary from the school in the next couple of years. That's a possibility, but more and more it looks like it likely going towards that direction. And then just some potential issues related to Title IX just due to the unequal distribution of money. So there could be a lot of lawsuits coming the NCAA's way and also these other schools' way, just because there's so much unknown about the situation. And also, just with all these rules, there are potentially some loopholes and stuff that could bring a lot of issues down the line.